Good morning, and sorry Brendan can't be here. It's actually his son who has COVID, but he's not feeling very well, so anyway, it's always a good idea not to come when there's the COVID in the house. So apologies you're not hearing from Brendan, who as Pedro said, has done the lion's share of this work, and he's a much more attractive fellow than I am. So, but I'll try and do his work justice and explain something about how green finance can help with funding the nature restoration across catchments. So I thought I'd start with a reminder about the biodiversity crisis if we needed it, and why moving the dial is so important. In the words of David Attenborough, who Alan, or somebody mentioned earlier, that the next few decades represent a final opportunity to build a stable home for ourselves and restore the rich and healthy and wonderful world that we inherited from our ancestors. And then also maybe just quickly reflecting as well that the corporate plan that NatureScot has shifts that emphasis from previously being about protecting nature to a core part of that being about restoration, and the Scottish Biodiversity Strategy that Lisa outlined earlier. So for this talk it's in three bits really. One, to touch on the finance gap and why we need landscape scale restoration in river catchments. Two, touch on some examples about what that looks like and the work that Brendan and others have been doing with Fisheries Management Scotland. And then a third part about how we are going to try and make the money work. So the finance gap is, Alan mentioned this earlier, that a study done in 2021 by the Green Finance Initiative was estimating that we need £20 billion to restore nature in Scotland by 2030, was it? I think. I've forgotten the date. But and that's to deliver our restoration targets. And those are the targets within the Scottish Biodiversity Strategy and within the Climate Change Plan. And there's clearly not enough public money to do that, which is why we in government are embracing the need for green finance and private investment in nature restoration. And as part of that private investment, the carbon market's already well established, as many of you will know and probably been involved with. So that's funding projects through the peatland code, which you can see a number of the sites there on the left, and the woodland code already on the right. So it's a busy place on the carbon market. But we're working with Scottish Government to develop, as Pedro alluded to, new biodiversity metrics and credit markets, to develop new revenue streams for land managers and to complement those carbon codes. So there's real potential for a biodiversity market to build on the success of the carbon codes. So we're working on a biodiversity metric, and then also with SEPA and Scottish Government's Hydronation to develop water metrics to support a new woodland water code, which we hope will arrive in a couple of years' time. And that means that measures to improve water quality and ultimately benefit species obviously like salmon will be able to generate revenue by selling credits to businesses like perhaps Scottish Water, who benefit from cleaner water, or insurance companies who will benefit from reduced flood risk. So there's new markets coming and the potential to bring billions of investment into nature. And so that will allow us to do things to generate revenue for things like natural flood management, as illustrated in the slide here, instead of carbon, to generate income from land managers. But as we all know, to make you need to do you need to do nature restoration at scale, but you also need to make private finance work. You need to work at scale as well, and there are many good reasons for doing that. Obviously, to build overall resilience in catchments, improve connectivity in nature networks, which are a core part of this biodiversity strategy. But it also allows you to scale up delivery and reduce your costs working at scale, and create jobs and a supply chain within that just transition. And so one example of that might be, I'm not just blowing you to trumpet because he's on next, but the Spey Catchment Initiative, for example, which is planning, developing and implementing projects locally rather than just using that process being done through consultants or from elsewhere. And all those things will help ease the attraction of private finance. But working at scale, why would we want to focus on river catchments? Well, it's obvious to everyone in this room, but we think that river catchments are the logical scale to plan and deliver that private finance. And that's hence we're working with Fisheries Management Scotland and the boards and trust to develop a more joined up approach, because because these are areas that communities and businesses associate themselves with, and there's a management structure in place through the boards and trusts, and we can build on some of the other management strategies like river basin planning and flood risk planning and so forth. So some examples of private finance and at scale. One example of this might be, this is a map of Hagshaw Energy Cluster in South Lanarkshire and Ayrshire. And this is landscape planning with across 11 different wind farms and 10 landowners. And they would, to bring together what would have been individual habitat management plans in a collaborative way to deliver new investment for nature restoration. So they can target the investment to the right place in that part of Scotland. So for example, each wind farm might have been doing a small amount of peatland restoration on their own site, but by bringing that together as a cluster, they're able to deliver that at scale on that, I'm colourblind, but I think it's blue-ish blob on the left, or to do riparian woodland creation in strategic areas within the cluster. So that's allowing to do more impactful nature restoration at scale. And other examples, the potential for landscape scale investment through carbon codes. So this is working with Tweed Forum and shows the potential for woodland creation and peatland restoration in the upper Tweed catchment, and then directing carbon investments into those areas in a targeted and planned way at scale across the upper catchment. I'm conscious of acronyms, and here's another one. But we're also at the same time exploring models like the Landscape Enterprise Networks, or LENS, which bring investment to catchment restoration. So they've been successful in England, and many of those are focused on rivers, sort of emphasising, I think, the point that catchments are the landscape scale we should be working at. And there are 3 locations where we're actively supporting new LENS projects in Scotland, on the Spey, and Roger will say a bit more about that next, and Loch Leven and on Isla. And this is one of the projects that came out of the dialogue with Fisheries Management Scotland that was alluded to earlier. And then another example, finally, would be with the Kyle of Sutherland Fisheries Trust. So we're working with Alan and others at Fisheries Management Scotland and the team up at the trust there to develop an application to the Facility for Investment Ready Nature Scotland, Ferns, to develop, again, a model there for financing nature restoration involving riparian woodland and peatland restoration, again, in the catchment there. And I would just put a shout out for Ferns. So if anyone's interested in exploring, so this facility here is providing public funding to develop ideas to get them closer to market readiness. So you don't have to have a well-developed idea that's just requires a bit more of a push to then start attracting investors, although that would be brilliant. It's also there to help develop ideas and get them closer to fruition with local communities. And so we're accepting expressions of interest for at least the next three weeks, and I would encourage anyone to contact us through that means, and we can provide feedback. And this is in partnership with the National Lottery Heritage Fund as well. So we're drawing on their expertise and funds. So if you're at all interested in that, then if you just go to the NatureScot website, it's on our projects, our funding opportunities, and it's, as I say, it's open for the next few weeks. And there's also, sorry, just to continue that theme, there's also a series of webinars to also increase and support learning, because as Pedro said, everyone's on a learning curve here, and I'm not alone in that, and so is Brendan and others. And so there's a series of structured webinars to shine light and to encourage discussion about what's involved in green finance. And then I just wanted to finish finally on how we might make the money work. So there are a range of different factors that are driving private investment, and I know I was asked to say a bit about that. So what's driving that? Well, there's the on the back of the COP that's been mentioned a number of times, and the overall nature crisis. Their businesses are adopting a much more nature positive agenda. There's also others being driven by planning policies, so the National Planning Framework 4, as Lisa mentioned, and Ancha as well, is driving forward the importance of nature restoration. We also have the net zero objectives, and carbon offsetting is another thing that's driving investment in green finance and nature restoration. And then also large financial institutions have been driven by task forces on nature and climate financial disclosures, and that means they have to calculate and report on their carbon and nature impacts. So that's focusing minds on their impacts. And at the same time, there are issues like the pandemic and Ukraine and effects of climate change that are looking at supply chain and that becoming much more local, and that's helping to secure domestic supply chains for organisations like Diageo and Nestle are driving their involvement in projects like some of those that I mentioned under LENS. And then finally, protest groups and shareholders are also, we shouldn't underestimate the strength of that for driving businesses towards this sort of agenda. So there's a potential for significant investment, but that needs to be responsibly done. So as we develop this, we need that to be a just transition involving communities. So that's why in March last year, the Scottish Ministers published their interim principles for responsible investment to make sure it delivers or to try and ensure it delivers a positive land use change and meaningful benefits for communities, so it is just. And the Scottish Land Commission are also developing protocols to set out how this should work. And then later this year, Scottish Government will be publishing an investment framework, which will set out more detail again. And going back to the announcement that Pedro just made about the River Catchment Restoration Fund, or funding from source to sea, and we too are excited about that potential funding and look forward to that application in Ferns. And as I say, that would be developed as a sister fund to the SMEF, the Scottish Marine Environmental Enhancement Fund. And with a similar sort of governance structure, so that screens for ethical investment, and it's based around philanthropic funding. And for the first time, for example, SMEF has been using some public funding but upscaling the amount of private funding coming in. So they've just made their first awards using solely private funding, and that's the sort of space we'd want to get to within the river catchments. But we need to take our time and develop that well, so hence the application to Ferns about making sure we develop that carefully. But there's a great opportunity to build on the success of SMEF and to integrate the two together. And another thing I just wanted to touch on was the Riverwoods initiative. So that's been mentioned as well, that SWT are leading. And really pleased to hear that that's the Riverwoods Investment Readiness Pioneers Fund has supported these 5 new projects, which will help pave the way to larger landscape scale projects. And that's around, and particularly around producing a pipeline of projects, because as we develop the potential for funding to come in, they really need projects that they can then fund. So you need that pipeline of projects coming forward, and initiatives like that and others that we can bring out of Ferns and so on, and learning from that and our wider work with Fisheries Management Scotland and you guys can develop that really strong pipeline of restoration projects. And of course there are public funding streams, and these have been mentioned by their acronyms a number of times, and that we need those to continue to work alongside private investment. And we're working, there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to try and make sure that we invest public money in a way that complements and rather than frustrates private investment. So there's the Peatland Action, and there's a facility downstairs and a number of those staff here, and encourage you to avail yourself of those. And then there's also the Nature Restoration Fund that Lisa highlighted earlier, and that's providing £65 million. There's the agri-environment schemes and forestry grant schemes, and then also going back to Ferns, this facility for encouraging private investment. But all those totals, and some of those numbers are extremely large for public funding in the current fiscal environment, obviously don't come close to the 20 billion that's been mentioned a number of times. So these need to be a springboard for helping us to bridge that funding gap. So hopefully that's provided a quick whistle-stop tour on the significant investment that's coming to nature restoration in Scotland, and explained why the Royal Collective we think catchments are the way to plan for that. And then maybe just returning to the words of David Attenborough at the aforementioned COP, he said that, and I think he's right, that if we work together and we can plan, sorry, what am I saying here? Sorry. That we'll see this recovery in Scotland in our lifetime. because there has been in his lifetime this terrible decline, but in ours we can start to see that recovery, and I look forward to working with all of you to make that happen. Thank you very much.